There is a kingdom where shackles.
Hey guys, it's Justin here. I'm here to go over with you the lesson for October the 20th. This is going to be a lesson over John chapter 17, verses 6 through 26. So if you will, take out your lesson guide there, and we're going to walk through that. We're going to do this a little bit differently today. You're actually going to hear from two of us. So I'm going to walk you through the teaching the text part, and then when we get to the end of that, I'm going to hand it over to Brett, and Brett is going to give you the application moment and then walk you through the conclusion. So if you will, go ahead and take out your lesson guide there, and you'll see that your primary teaching point on page 1 reads this: when we face difficult circumstances in life, we're all tempted to throw in the towel, but we can face our difficulties with confidence, knowing that Jesus is in our corner. He's praying on our behalf and giving us everything we need to complete the tasks that He sets before us. So basically, this week is all about you understanding that Jesus has got your back, and understanding that you can go through life knowing that the goals that He sets before you are accomplishable because Jesus has got your back. He's in your corner. So your teaching tip there on page 1 is very important. If you don't do this already, I would really encourage you to do this. But it basically tells you that Jesus is spending time praying for His people, praying for His disciples specifically, and then He prays for all the disciples that will come through their ministry. And I encourage you in the teaching tip there to spend some time praying this week, and hopefully every week, for each person that's in your group, for each person that you know by name, and you know what's going on in their lives. Spend some time praying for them, and if you've got time, if it's not something that's so personal that it might be embarrassing, maybe send them a text message or a Facebook message or an email, and let those people in your group know, hey, I'm praying for you this morning, and I just want you to know that, and I'm praying for you for this if it's something specific. So it's a very, very good way to let them know that you've got their back. So as you're going through this lesson, try to spend some time each day praying for one of the people in your group. It'll be a great object lesson for you as you prepare for this lesson. So going into the introduction on page 2, you see the question is asked, do you find it easier? Actually, I'm sorry, before I get to that, the teaching tip is very important on this page. It tells you that normally these lessons that you're teaching in small group correlate in content with Brett's sermons on Sundays. This week is not so much the case for that. The correlation in this lesson and Brett's sermon is that they're both taken from the same big chunk of Scripture. In John chapter 13 through 17, you see one big story about Jesus with His disciples on that last night in the upper room with the Lord's Supper. I mean, it's all one long discourse of what happened right before Jesus went to the cross. So the correlation this week is not as strong as you would normally see in content, but it is in its proximity to each other. So his lesson will be coming from that section, as will this lesson. So there in the introduction you see the question, do you ever find it easier to accomplish big goals when you know someone is supporting you? And from there you can, if you want to, if you feel comfortable with this, launch into an illustration from one of my favorite movies, the movie Rocky. Rocky was a great movie. It's a great underdog story, and we all love a great underdog story. In Rocky 1, at the very end of the movie, you see this great scene that illustrates the point that we're trying to get at this morning, and it's where Rocky has gone all 15 rounds with Apollo Creed. They're both really beat up. They're both exhausted, and they're sent to their corners. All of the media rush in, and they are trying to interview Rocky and asking him, hey, what is it that kept you going? You know, there were several times when you were down and you got back up. What is it that kept you going? What is it that gave you that drive? And all he says is one word: Adrian! That's a horrible impersonation, I know. But over and over he says Adrian's name, and you hear her, Rocky, Adrian, Rocky. And then they finally get up, and she gets into the ring and up to him, and he says, hey, where's your hat? Because obviously that's perfect writing. But the illustration is that she was what kept him going. He knew that she was watching. He knew that she had his back. He knew that she was in his corner. So he kept fighting, and he kept going because he wanted to make her proud, and he wanted to show her what he was made of. And the point is that we tend to do more when we know that we have someone supporting us. When we know that we have someone in our corner and someone that has our backs, we tend to be much more highly motivated. And that is the point of the lesson today, is that Jesus has our backs. He's praying for us. He prayed for us 2,000 years ago, and he prays for us still. So this morning, as you go through this lesson, let people know that they've got someone in their corner that's far better than Adrian Taraki. They've got Jesus. So then you go into page 3 there that's teaching the text, and you have them all open up to John chapter 17. You see in your teaching tip that this is one of those passages where it's not so easy to just walk through, like if you're used to doing a more streamlined exegetical approach to taking a passage apart, because Jesus jumps around a lot in his prayers. This is encouragement for any of you who have those really ADD prayers where you start praying one thing and jump into another. Jesus did that through this prayer. He jumped around a lot, and he goes back and forth between these different, I guess, themes and topics. So it's difficult for you to walk through it like that. So it's very important that you familiarize yourself with all that he said in this passage, because you're going to try to present it in a I guess, progression where it doesn't necessarily happen that way in the text. There is a progression, but it's not as strong in the themes as it is in just who he's praying for. So you can give a little bit of background on the passage there. You see it on page 1. But ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to say that Jesus prayed for 3 major things for his disciples. He starts out in the section that you're beginning here in John chapter 17 verses 6 and following, praying for specifically his 12 disciples. And the first thing he prays is that they are protected from the evil one. He prays that God would protect them, the Father would protect them, because Jesus knows that he's leaving. So we see that Jesus is praying for them to be guarded in his name and in the name of the Father. Over and over again, Jesus asks that God would protect them. And this is a pretty neat thing to know, that Jesus is asking for our protection. But it's important that when you get to the end of this section, you note that he wasn't just praying for our protection just so we could be protected, but there was a purpose behind it. And this is where the progression is in the themes. He prays for the disciples' protection so that something can happen. He doesn't just protect them because they need safety. He says protect them so that they can be unified. That's the second prayer that he prays, and you see that there on page 4. That Jesus prays that they would be one, just as we are one, Father. He prays for the same type of unity that Jesus and the Father experience within the Holy Trinity, and he wants them to be unified, us, disciples, to be unified with each other in the same way. So he prays for their unity, and this is a big deal, because we as churches, and as you see in a minute, Brett prefers for us to refer to us as congregations within the greater church, as we as congregations tend to do. We tend to not be unified. Even within our own congregations, we have factions, and that's why churches split, and the churches down the road we have arguments with, and I mean, over and over again, the church has shown itself, the church as a whole has shown itself to be less unified than Jesus would desire. But he prays a very lengthy prayer for our unity, and you can see there that there's a reference in Philippians chapter 2 verses 1 through 5 where Paul talks about what unity would look like. So that's a great reference for you to pull up and have somebody read. But the goal that we're trying to get to is to ask this question, what would happen if we were a unified group of people as the church in Mobile? What would happen if we really were unified? And that leads us to the third point that Jesus prayed, is that he wanted us to be protected so that we could be unified, but we weren't just to be unified for the sake of unity. We were to be unified for the sake of mission. He wanted us to be missionaries. He wanted us to be witnesses. So that was his third prayer, is he prayed for us to be protected so that we as a church, in the general church, could be unified together. And he wanted us to be unified so that ultimately we would be witnesses for him. So if you look there in the third section, which is on page 5, you see this section on where he's praying for us to be witnesses. He prayed for our unity so that we could give the best witness to the message that he had for the world, is that he is better. He breaks down walls. He breaks down barriers. He brings people who are totally opposite together so that they can minister together and love each other and be unified in ways that they never would otherwise. I mean, this is Jesus breaking down walls so that we can ultimately be with God. I mean, that's That's the ultimate illustration of unity in the face of diversity, is that we as sinful people come to know God, who is sinless and perfect and holy, because Jesus broke down those walls. And here our unity is supposed to witness to the fact that that can happen in the lives of anyone. So you see there on page 5 a pretty significant section on why we should be unified in order to witness. It's ultimately that's the end game, is that Jesus prayed that we as believers would be so unified that people couldn't help but notice that there was something different about us. And you see a couple of questions at the bottom of page 5 that are very, very pointed about how people outside of the church views the church. Do you think that they view us as unified? And if not, what does that tell them? Or if they saw us as completely unified in our purposes, what would that tell them? Some great discussion points there. And you see the fun fact that even in the city of Mobile, we have more than 30 different denominations of congregations represented in the city, our city alone. 30 different denominations. That's huge. There are certainly differences in the church, but it is worth overcoming those differences in order to be unified in the mission that we've been given. So in page 6, you notice that statement that I gave you just a second ago about how Pastor Brett doesn't like to refer to Dayspring as a church, so to say. He likes to refer to it as a congregation that is a part of the church. And in doing so clarifies that this attitude that we have that tends to be divisive, that this is a church and this is our church and this is the main way to do church. So it's a little nuance that he prefers, and it would be great for you to pick that up and to spread that through your own small groups there. As you get to the end of this, it's neat to see that Jesus didn't just pray for his 12 disciples, but he changes his prayer in verse 20, and he turns it to those that will come to know him through the message of his disciples. So he's praying ultimately for you. He's praying for you 2,000 years ago that you would have these very same things, that you would have protection from God so that you could be unified with other believers, and ultimately so that together we could witness for him, for his glory. He prayed for us. He's in our corners, just like he was in the corners of the disciples back 2,000 years ago, and look at what they did. They turned the world upside down for him. So know that Jesus is praying for you, and he prays for you still. He still intercedes on your behalf, and that is an incredible, incredible thought, to know that we have a God in our corner that is always, always taking our backs and covering us in his prayers. It's a great thought. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Brett, and he's going to give you some instruction for the application moment, and with that, the handout that goes with it, and he'll give you the conclusion as well. So it's good to get to spend some time with you again. I hope that you are enjoying these lessons, and I hope that they're doing some great things in your small groups. So God bless. We'll see you again next time.
Okay, so big thanks to Justin for taking us through the teaching part of your lesson. Now I'm going to step in and guide you through the application moment. So if you look on your handout, you'll see there on page 7, it guides you into the application moment for your group. And we're going to switch things up this week to keep you from getting in a rut as a small group. Typically at this point, I encourage you to split your group into clusters of 4 or 5, and you distribute your handout and let them work through it together. But I would say this week, why don't you keep your group intact as one large group? You distribute the handout, and then you serve as sort of the facilitator of that group of people there. So I'm doing that for 2 reasons. Number one, just to mix things up, and again, to keep you from getting in a rut as a group. But secondly, I think this handout is going to necessitate that there's someone who already kind of knows the answers, so to speak. And so I'm going to make sure that you have some good answers to lead your group. I want to encourage you to let them let them find those answers and let them move toward those answers. Don't treat this as a lecture portion of your group. You've already done a lot of that. Let your group talk this out, but you be the one to kind of lead them to the water, lead them to the streams, and guide along the way. So at this point in your lesson, distribute the handouts to everybody and keep them together. And flip on over in your transcript now over to page 9, and let's look at the handout together, okay? And let me give you some things to think about and some things you can insert. I'm going to give you some cross references that you may throw out there as people discuss these things. So look at page 9, And let's walk through this together. You got two things here. Number one, it says, as it relates to this idea of one church, many congregations, and you've got two questions, or 2 points. Point A, how have you seen one church, many congregations not practiced? And then point B, how have you seen one church, many congregations practiced and exercised? Let people talk about that. And really what you're getting at in point A there is, how have you seen, maybe within our city or another city where folks have lived, how have you seen the congregations not function as a single church? How have you seen them divide up, or how have you seen them act territorial? Those sorts of things. And you may have all kinds of answers here. I've seen this myself. One church, many congregations. I've seen it not function. I've seen where churches act as if they are the church, and this other church is their own independent church, and to get very territorial. I've seen congregations get upset and angry when another congregation moves within close proximity. I've seen that. Maybe you've seen that. Maybe you've been angry before when somebody else did that. But that's not a good example of one church, many congregations. I've had people ask me, we've had two congregations who've settled in on Cody Road or Solly Road since I've moved here, since I've been here at Dayspring. And I've had people ask, what do you think about so-and-so moving up the street? Or what do you think about so-and-so moving down the street? And in both instances, I've been thrilled, because those are congregations that have a little bit of a different flavor than we do. So I see it as a good thing. This is one church, one body made up of different parts. So you're just talking people through, how have you seen it work? How have you seen it not? Hopefully you have some good examples of how you've seen it work. I hope you've seen some good examples. If nothing else, you've seen some happen here at Dayspring. Justin, who led the first part of this coaching session, he's the pastor of a congregation. They don't have a building, so guess where they meet? They meet at Dayspring in the shack on Sunday nights. So there's one good example. If you've never seen an example, well, there's one. Ever since their inception, they've met here because we recognize that they're part of the same body that we're part of, different expressions, different congregation. But they needed some help. We had some help to give, so they've met here. You've seen it in recent days as well here at Dayspring. Cross River Church, a church of a totally different denomination here in town. You remember when their facility was burned and they were looking for temporary meeting space? If you remember, they met for several weeks right here on our campus on a Sunday morning. Back when we weren't having our third morning worship service, we let them have that space. So there are some good examples that you can point out if God forbid people have never seen good examples of one church, many congregations. There's some that you can throw out and maybe get that ball rolling. But, we're also involved in different associations of different Baptist churches where we work together cooperatively, especially with our monies. Cooperative program dollars, if you're not familiar with that. We put monies in the same pool for the purpose of mission work and church planting. And so there's just another example of, there's one church made up of many parts. That's what the Bible tells us. And that doesn't we've somehow just applied that to individual congregations, like one church, many parts. Well, we'll look at Dayspring and go, yeah, we're one church made up of many parts. Well, that does apply. But in the broader context, it's talking about within a city, there's one church made up of many parts. So, when you really start thinking like that, it really opens up a whole lot of possibilities about how you can reach people and the burden that's upon you to reach people. You don't have to be everything as a single congregation. There are other congregations who do good works, and we can support them and cheer them on and not have to duplicate them. So number one, you're just talking about that, okay? How have you seen it work? How have you seen it not work? Now, point number two. It says, read the following passages, and after each one, you're going to complete this statement. Here's the statement you're going to complete. If we are indeed going to function as one church, and again, we're talking, think citywide. If indeed we're going to function as one church, many congregations, one church, then, and then you fill in the blank. Now you've got three passages to work through for your ease and for, to make it easy for you. We've actually printed those verses on your handout this week, so everybody's got the same, translation they can pull off of. Let me talk you through these three, and here are some good answers to the fill in the blank based on each of these, passages. The first one, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Now, as you read through that, Here's basically the verse I want you to kind of hone in on. Look at verse 4. This is the Apostle Paul talking to the church in Corinth, and they're fighting, okay? So the congregations, the church in Corinth, they're not getting along. Paul writes them a letter urging them to get along, and look at this. Verse 4. When one congregation says, I follow Paul, and another says, well, I follow Apollos, are you not mere men? He says, are you not just fighting like people who haven't been redeemed and indwelled by God? That's what he's getting at. So here's a good fill in the blank here. If we're going to function as one church, then here's what I would say to that. We're going to have to relinquish our addiction to or our infatuation with one particular or one specific leader. We see this all the time in church life. People are attached to a body because of the leader who is attached there. You see it all the time. A pastor will be pastoring a church, then he has to leave for whatever reason, either through death or the call of God. He leaves, and all of a sudden, a lot of people quit coming to church. Well, if we're going to function as one church, made up of multiple congregations, we're going to have to relinquish our addiction to and our infatuation with specific leaders and specific congregations. It's not a healthy thing. And, I hear the same thing that some other pastors will hear, and it's intended to flatter, but it's really not. Every now and then somebody will say, well, when you're not here, I don't even come, That's not a compliment. When we become more addicted to and infatuated with the who, being the leader, more than the what, which is the practice of our faith, then we're missing a mark. So that would be a good fill in the blank there on that one, and that could get all kinds of discussion going, and you may need to temper it a little bit if people start, getting a little too personal with different leaders or congregations here in town. That's not cool, all right? So don't really let it go there. Number 2, Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 through 19. Now, here's what this passage is. Paul is talking about the prayer that he prays for the church, which is a really cool tie-in with your lesson because Jesus has talked about his prayer. In this one, I want you to notice several things that Paul prays for the church. In verse 16, he prays that the church would be strengthened with power. In verse 17, that they would experience a great deal of love. In verse 18, that they would have a grasp and an understanding of how deep and how wide, how great the love of God is. Here's what I would key in on if I were you. One little phrase in verse 18. He says, I pray that you would experience this and that you would know that and that you would get this. I pray that you would have power. Look at verse 18. That you may have power together with all the saints to do these things. And there's an implication here that if we are going to understand the depth of God's love and if we are going to function with a great deal of power and authority in our culture, that we're going to have to do this alongside of all the others who claim to be followers of Jesus, okay? So I think that's really important that we notice that he's saying, I pray that you would experience all of these things and you would know these things and that you would function this way together with all the other believers. So fill in the blank here. I don't know how you might word that, but if we're going to indeed function as one church, then perhaps we need to see all the other parts of the body as necessary. We aren't independent of them. We are interdependent as a body of Christ. So you might word that however you want. I'll tell you a great cross-reference here. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 12. Maybe as your group's talking about this, maybe just throw that one in. And you can look that up. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 12. All right, so discussion point number C here on this one. The third passage you're going to look at, if indeed you even have time for this, all right? But Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 7, I hope you do have time for this one because this one's pretty important. And there are two different angles you can go on this one. As you look at it, basically Paul's talking to the church in Ephesus. He's encouraging them to be humble, to be patient, to bear with one another in love. And then look at verse 3. Here's what I would focus in on perhaps. He says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So here's maybe your fill in the blank there. If indeed we're going to function as one church, then it's going to take some effort. I mean, we're going to have to try. We have unity. We don't have to make unity. God's already given that to the church, but we do have to exercise it. We do have to practice it. And that takes some effort and it takes some intentionality. So that might be your fill in the blank here. You know, another angle that you may want to go here, he talks about how there's one body, one spirit, one Lord, one Father. This may be an appropriate place to point out, if the conversation kind of goes this way, that you can only have unity with the church. There are a lot of places who have the title church who don't embrace the same faith that we do. There are people who believe that salvation can be found in some other name other than Jesus Christ. That's outside the orthodoxy of faith that we hold to. So, you know, that may be something you want to get into. It may be something you don't want to get into, kind of depending on how your group time has flowed. But when we talk about one body, one church, well, it does technically have to be the church. And there are other groups and, you know, organizations who claim to be the church of Jesus, and quite frankly, some of them aren't, because they hold to things where salvation can be found in some other way than through the blood of Jesus, and we don't hold to that. That's not something that we affirm. So that may be an angle you want to go there. You know, if indeed we're going to have to function as one church, then we must function with the actual church. You know, you can determine whether or not that's appropriate for your group. All right, but that's your handout, and that's kind of where you're trying to go there. Really, you are casting vision at this point. What might it look like in Mobile if all the congregations, if we weren't in competition with one another? What might it look like if we actually worked in conjunction with one another and in cooperation with one another? What might that look like, and what might it actually accomplish? So as you think about Jesus' prayer for the church and how he prayed that we would be protected so that we would be unified, so that we would carry out the mission, what you're doing now in the discussion time, you're kind of saying, okay, what's it going to look like if we are indeed going to be one church in this city? Then what are some things that are going to be necessary? What's it going to take? And hopefully these passages will kind of get you in that direction, all right? After you've gone through the group exercise, at that point you can just wrap up the lesson, and there's a simple conclusion for you on your teaching transcript on page 8. Very simple conclusion. It kind of brings you back to Rocky Balboa if you started off with that illustration, which I personally love Rocky, so I would start off with that one. But look at the great line here. It said, Rocky lasted till the end because he knew that win or lose, the one he loved was in his corner. Well, Jesus has our backs. And he prayed for us a long time ago, and he still prays for us today. And this should be great motivation for you in your life, that when you find yourself facing an Apollo Creed-sized problem in life, you can face it in confidence, knowing that Jesus is standing in your corner, cheering you on till the final bell. And quite frankly, who would we rather have in our corner? So your memory verse is there. Your weekly memory verse is there beneath that, and you can see how it ties in. It makes total sense. Hey, hope this coaching video has helped you. I hope that it's kind of prepared you to present your lesson on Sunday. It's a great lesson. I'm going to be preaching out of the same general part of John's Gospel, leading us through a Lord's Supper service. So your lesson really is independent of the sermon in that respect. But I hope you have a great lesson. I hope you learn. I hope a vision is caught by your group that, hey, what if we could play a part of the church in Mobile functioning as one body? What if we could help make that a reality? I hope things go well with you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you Sunday.